You walk out into the twilight of a stable, where the air smells of dry alfalfa, leather, and old cedar, and you see your barn cat sitting on a hay bale. Last summer, we had a gray thing here, my youngest named Smoke, and she was in a bad way. She was scratching at her neck till the fur came off in patches, shaking her head until her ears rattled, and worrying at the root of her tail till the skin went red and raw. A cat in that state is a miserable animal, and it is a hard thing to watch because she cannot tell you what is wrong, and she cannot help herself. My youngest came to me near in tears about it. Now, the common thing to do these days, the thing near everyone tells you to do, is to drive down to the supply store or the veterinarian and hand over a $20 bill for a tiny plastic tube of liquid. A chemical poison so potent you are warned not to get a single drop of it on your own fingers. Yet you are supposed to squeeze it right onto the skin of your animal, and you have to buy it again next month, and the month after that, year on year, for the life of the animal. If you stop and think about it, it is a strange sort of cycle to get trapped in. Why do we pay for this every single year? How did folks keep animals healthy for thousands of years before these little tubes of poison were invented? I am Elias Yoder, and we have always kept a cat or two working the barn here, keeping the mice down. We have known the flea, and we have known how to fight it long before anybody sold a chemical fix in a box. What I want to share with you today is the plain old way. It is cheaper than what they sell you. It is safer for the animal, and once you understand the truth of it, it works. But before we lay a hand on the animal, we have to look at the boundaries of this knowledge. I am a farmer, not a scientist with letters after my name, and I will not tell you this is a magic trick that works in 5 seconds while you sit back and watch. This method takes your own 2 hands, a little patience of an evening, and some real labor. More than that, if your animal is already scraped down to weeping sores, or gone off its food and acting weak, that is past the flea and into a real sickness. That is when you put your pride away and take the animal to a proper veterinarian. The old ways are for the honest common trouble, to handle it before it turns into a disaster. Here is the first thing you have to understand, and it is the piece that changes everything because near everybody gets it backward. When your cat is scratching, you think the problem is the fleas living on the cat. It is not. The fleas you can see crawling through the fur are only a tiny fraction of the trouble. The big part of the trouble is all around you, down in the bedding, in the cracks of the floorboards, in the straw, and you cannot see a single bit of it. Let me explain it the way my grandfather explained it to me, when I was no bigger than a pump handle. A flea does not live its whole life on the cat. The cat is just the restaurant. It is where the flea goes to feed, but it is not where it breeds and grows. A single female flea on your animal lays her eggs right there in the fur, and those eggs are as smooth as glass. They do not stick to the hair. They roll right off the cat like tiny grains of white salt wherever the cat walks, sleeps, or scratches. They fall into the rug by the door, down into the seams of the chair, into the cracks of the oak floors. Down in those dark, hidden places, away from the light, those eggs hatch into tiny worm-like things, too small to see with the naked eye. They feed on dust and organic matter, spinning themselves into little cocoons, just waiting. They can wait for weeks, deep down where no broom can easily drag them out, until they feel the vibration of a warm body passing by. Then they hatch out as grown fleas, jump up, and start the whole misery over again. My grandfather taught me this with a lesson I have never forgotten. We had a barn cat gone raw, and I was set on the notion that if I just bathed that cat enough with strong soap, the trouble would be over. He let me do it. He let me wash that cat until she hated the sight of me, and she came out clean as a whistle, not a single flea left in her fur. I was proud of myself. My grandfather just looked at her, crouched down next to me in the straw, and said, "Now watch." We came back the next morning, and that poor cat was crawling with them again, every bit as bad as the day before. He looked at me and said, "You did not lose the battle on the cat, boy. You lost it in the straw." You cleaned the soldier and left the whole army sitting in the barracks. The enemy was never mostly on her. It was all around her, waiting. That is the lesson. You will wear yourself out forever fighting the small part you can see, and never touch the part that matters. For every single flea you find on your animal, there are 99 more waiting in the nest around them. If you only treat the animal, it is like bailing water out of a leaking boat and never plugging the hole. You have to fight the nest. Now, modern biology confirms exactly what the old-timers knew by observation. Those hidden life stages, the eggs, the larvae, the pupae, make up about 95% of the entire flea population in a home or a barn. So how do we touch them without spraying the rooms down with harsh chemicals that we ourselves have to breathe? It comes down to understanding the nature of the creature itself. The grown flea is a marvel of design. It has a hard, flat shell covered in a waxy coat, much like the wax on a fresh apple. That wax sheds water completely. If you were to take a live flea and drop it into a plain cup of clean water, it would not sink and it would not drown. The flea is so light and its waxy coat is so repellent that it sits right on top of the water, held up by the tight skin of the surface tension, the exact same way a water strider skates across a quiet pond. It will float there, row itself to the dry edge of the cup, climb out, and hop right back onto your animal. Plain water cannot hold it. But generations ago, folks discovered that nature has a soft spot, a weakness you can exploit with something you already have sitting by your kitchen sink. It requires one single tool, a simple, fine-toothed metal comb where the teeth are set so close together that the fur passes through but the flea gets caught, and a single cup of warm water mixed with just one drop of ordinary dish soap. You might wonder how one single drop of soap could change the whole battle, or how you use these two things together to clear the animal and dismantle the army hiding in the floorboards without ever buying a tube of poison again. Tomorrow, I am going to sit down right here and show you the exact physical mechanics of how this works, the specific way to move the comb so you do not miss their favorite hiding spots, and how we begin to systematically clear the nest itself. Let us sit down together on the floor and look at how this is done. To begin, you need a good bright spot, near a low window where the afternoon sun comes in, or right under a clear lamp, because you need your eyes to see the truth of what is happening. Bring a small white towel and lay it flat across your lap. That white cloth is your workbench. It lets you spot any dark thing that falls from the fur immediately. Beside you, on a stable stool or right on the floorboards, where it cannot be easily tipped, place a heavy ceramic mug or a wide-mouthed glass jar. Do not use a flimsy plastic cup. A flea is a nervous creature, and a heavy jar will not wobble when your hand moves fast. Fill that jar with warm water, just comfortable to the back of your knuckle, about 3/4 of the way to the top. Now, take your bottle of plain dish soap. It does not matter the brand, but choose the old, clear kind if you have it. The one that smells faintly of lemons or nothing at all, rather than those thick, modern formulas with heavy perfumes. Bring the bottle over the water, tilt it slow, and let exactly one drop fall. Watch it close. That single amber or blue drop will sink straight to the bottom like a little bead of oil before it begins to unfurl, rising up in pale, lazy ribbons through the water. Take a splinter of wood or the end of your comb and give it a gentle stir. You are not whipping up a lather. You do not want a thick head of foam or bubbles sitting on top, because bubbles give the flea a raft to climb onto. You want the water to look almost as clear as it did before, only with a slight, silken weight to it when you stop and think about what just happened in that jar. That single drop of soap has cut the grease and undone the invisible, tight skin of the water. Now, pull your animal onto your lap. If it is a barn cat like Smoke, she may be a little wary of the jar and the white cloth, so take a minute to stroke her under the chin. Let her settle until she begins to purr and her weight goes heavy against your knees. Now, pick up your tool. This is the fine metal comb we spoke of. The teeth must be steel, not plastic, set so tight you can barely see the light between them. When you hold it up, it should feel cool and heavy in your hand. This is where the first real mistake happens. And it is the mistake of a rushing man. A beginner will take that comb and try to drag it down the cat's back from nose to tail in long, fast strokes, like they are brushing a horse. Do not do that. If you pull fast, the tight teeth will catch on a tiny knot of fur, tug the skin, and that cat will be out of your lap and up into the rafters before you have caught a single bug. Instead, hold the comb at a low angle, almost flat against the skin, and work in short, deliberate paths no longer than 2 or 3 inches at a time. Start right at the back of the neck, just behind the ears where the cat cannot reach to scratch herself. Part the fur with your left thumb so you can see the pale pink skin underneath. Lay the teeth of the comb down gentle, and move it slow through the grain of the hair. As the comb moves, look closely at the teeth. When you catch them, they will look like tiny, dark, polished seeds trapped against the silver metal, and they will be wriggling. The moment you see that movement, do not hesitate, but do not jerk your hand either. Bring the comb straight down into the jar and swish it twice, short and sharp, under the surface of the water. Because of that one drop of soap, there is no surface skin to catch them. The waxy coat on the flea is cut instantly by the suds. The flea does not skate, it does not row. It sinks straight down to the bottom of the glass like a tiny grain of lead shot. If you look through the side of the glass, you will see them lying there at the bottom, perfectly still. Dark and small against the clear glass. Work your way methodically down the neck, then along the flat of the back, and finally down to the belly and the inside of the hind legs. This is the second place folks trip up. They skip the underside because the fur is soft and the cat is ticklish. But the belly and the warm, dark hollows where the legs meet the body are exactly where the fleas run to hide when they feel the cold steel coming down the back. Turn the cat gentle on her side, talk to her in a low voice, and comb those soft places with an even lighter touch. The thickest gathering, though, will always be at the very root of the tail, right on the lower back where the spine meets the hips. That is the flea's fortress. When you bring the comb through that spot, you will likely bring out a gray, gritty powder along with the live bugs. It looks exactly like black pepper from the shaker, and it will clog the teeth of your comb. This is what we call flea dirt. If you see it, do not just wipe it onto the towel. Dip the comb deep into your jar, wash the teeth clean with your finger under the water, and keep going until the teeth come out bright and empty. You must keep at this until the cat grows quiet and you have covered every inch of her skin. The first evening you do this, you might count 30, 40, or 50 of those little dark seeds at the bottom of your jar. Do not be discouraged by the number. Be glad that those 50 are at the bottom of the glass and not laying another 1,000 eggs in your rugs tonight. When you are finished, pour that soapy water right down the drain or out onto the gravel path away from the house, and wipe your comb dry with an oily rag so it does not rust. Now, understand this. This evening's work is only the first step of the journey. You have cleared the soldiers on the field, but tomorrow morning, as we learned from my grandfather's lesson, a fresh batch will have jumped up from the floorboards to take their place. To truly win, you must repeat this simple combing ritual every single evening at the same hour, while we begin the parallel work of clearing the house and the bedding around the animal. It is a quiet, rhythmic labor, but inside a week, you will notice the water in your jar stays clearer. The cat's skin loses its angry red color, and the frantic, rattling sound of her scratchings stops breaking the quiet of your evenings. Now that you know how to hold the comb and mix the water, let us stop and look at the why of it. I have always believed that if a man knows why a thing works, he becomes its master. But if he only knows the steps, he is just a servant to a recipe. What we are doing with that single drop of dish soap is not magic. It is a matter of physics and nature working together, and it is as old as the hills. Let us look first at the water itself. To our eyes, a cup of plain water looks like a simple liquid, loose and free. But if you could look at it through a magnifying glass, stronger than any eye, you would see that the very top layer of that water behaves like a tightly woven sheet of canvas. The tiny parts that make up the water, what the learned men call molecules, are all holding hands, pulling on each other with a fierce, quiet strength. They pull inward and sideways, creating an invisible, elastic skin across the top of the glass. We call this surface tension. A flea is light, so light it barely registers on a scale. And its body is covered in tiny, stiff hairs that point backward, along with that waxy, oil-rich coat we spoke of before. When that insect lands on plain water, its weight is not enough to break through that elastic skin. The wax on its shell pushes the water away, and the surface tension holds it right up in the air. It is the exact same principle that allows a heavy iron needle to float on top of a glass if you lay it down carefully enough. The needle is heavier than the water, but it cannot break the skin. When you add that single drop of soap, you are introducing a disruptive force. Soap is a restless thing. One end of a soap molecule loves water, but the other end hates it and loves oil or grease. The moment that drop hits the jar, those soap particles rush to the top and wedge themselves right between the water particles, forcing them to let go of each other's hands. The invisible canvas skin is instantly torn apart. There is no longer anything for the flea to stand on. At the exact same time, the oil-loving end of the soap attacks the waxy coat on the flea's shell, stripping away its buoyancy. Without its wax, and without the water's skin to hold it up, the flea sinks like a stone. It cannot breathe through its sides the way it usually does, because the soapy water fills its tiny breathing pores completely. It is a total, mechanical defeat of the insect's defenses, and it requires no chemical poison at all. But let us be entirely honest about the boundaries of this old way, because every tool has an edge, and it is a dangerous thing to pretend a tool can do what it was never meant to do. This method is a specific solution for a specific problem, and it has hard limits you must understand. First, let us look at where this works best. This is a targeted, localized remedy. It works beautifully in a standard home, a small workshop, or a tight, enclosed barn stall, where a cat spends the bulk of its time. It works because you can control the space. You can wash the single blanket in the basket, and you can sweep the specific corners where the dust gathers. Now let us look at where it flatly fails. If you have an open barn with dirt floors, a massive hayloft filled with thousands of loose bales, or a herd of free-roaming livestock tracking through the yard, this method will not clear the premises. You cannot mop a dirt floor. You cannot put 3 tons of loose Timothy hay into a hot washing machine. If your cat is roaming through acres of tall, wild brush where wild rabbits and opossums leave a fresh supply of hungry fleas every day, combing that cat in the evening will give her temporary relief, but it will never end the cycle. The environment is simply too vast, and the reservoir of the enemy is too deep. In those wide-open agricultural situations, the old way can only be a shield to protect the animal from total misery, not a broom to clean the whole country. Second, consider the material of your home. If you have tight, modern hardwood floors or simple linoleum, the sweeping and mopping we discussed will achieve a near-total victory because there are few places for the eggs to drop where your broom cannot reach. But if your house is filled with old, deep-pile wool carpets, or if your barn has ancient, deeply weathered oak planks with gaps between them an inch wide, the task becomes twice as hard. The flea larvae will crawl deep down into the very backing of a thick rug, or down beneath the heavy joists of the floor where a broom or a standard vacuum cannot pull them out. In those environments, you have to be 10 times more thorough, and it will take twice as long to see the end of the trouble. Finally, we must look at the limitation of the animal itself. This method relies entirely on the bond between you and the creature. It works with a cat like Smoke, who, despite being a working barn animal, knows my voice and will sit still for 20 minutes in exchange for a stroke under the chin. But if you are dealing with a completely feral cat, a wild thing that lives under the porch and will take the skin off your wrist if you try to hold it. This method is useless. You cannot slow calm an animal that is fighting for its life, and you cannot force a terrified creature to trust the jar of water. For those animals, the modern long-range treatments or oral medicines from the veterinarian are often the only humane choice left, because the alternative is letting the animals suffer from the pests. Understand this clearly. The old ways are not a magic spell that replaces common sense. They are a partnership between your labor, your environment, and your animal. If any one of those three pieces is broken or too wild to manage, the method reaches its limit. We do not use the old ways because they are perfect. We use them because where they do apply, they are the safest, cleanest, and most respectful way to live with the world around us. When you hold that fine metal comb in your hand and look into that jar of quiet soapy water, you are not inventing something new. You are reaching back through a long, unbroken line of people who had to solve the problems of life using only their wits and what was already in the cupboard. If you look into the old books, the records left by the people who settled the land long before electricity ever came to the valleys, you find that they understood the nature of these small pests with a clarity that might surprise a modern man. In the 19th century, before any chemical company existed to sell a bottle of pesticide, farmers and householders relied on what they called domestic economy. If you open a copy of the old agricultural journals from the 1800s, things like the American Agriculturist or the regional farm bulletins that were passed from neighbor to neighbor, you will see regular entries detailing exactly this kind of mechanical care. They did not have the word molecule back then, and they did not write about surface tension in the way a modern schoolbook does. But they wrote plainly about using whale oil soap, or a sliver of homemade lye soap stirred into a bucket of warm well water, to wash down the kennels, the blankets, and the coats of their working terriers and hearth cats. They knew from direct daily observation that plain water let the bugs skip away, but the soap held them fast and snuffed them out, even further back. During the centuries when the Great Plague was a memory, and people began to realize that cleanliness in the home was the first wall of defense against sickness, the fine-toothed horn or bone comb was one of the most precious small possessions a family owned. In the historic inventories of early American households, right alongside the iron kettles and the spinning wheels, you will often find a small horn comb listed. It was not just for vanity. It was a critical tool of health. It was how a mother kept her children and her household animals clean of the small things that bite in the dark. And if you think this is just old-fashioned folklore that has been left behind by progress, you can look to the modern research bulletins issued by our own university extension offices today. If you pull up the insect management guides from places like the University of California's Agriculture and Natural Resources Division, or the veterinary extension papers from Ohio State, you will find they say the exact same thing. They write it out in formal, scientific language, advising that a flea comb used in conjunction with a mild soapy bath or a dip is one of the most effective non-chemical methods for managing pests on young kittens and sensitive animals. They confirm that the physical breakdown of the water's surface tension is an absolute lethal mechanism that the insect cannot develop a resistance to. Stop and think about that. A flea can mutate over a few generations so that a chemical poison no longer harms its system. And that is happening right now with many of the expensive store-bought drops. But a flea can never mutate away to swim on water that has no skin. Physics does not change. The old way remains true because the laws of nature do not care about the passing of time. It is a comforting thing to realize that the simplest solution is often the one that stands the longest. We live in a time that tries to convince us that every trouble requires a complicated, expensive thing in a plastic box. We are taught to look outside ourselves, to hand over our money, and to let someone else solve the small frictions of daily life. But the truth is much closer to home, So, if you go out to your stable tonight, or if you look down at the rug by your stove, and you see your own animal worrying at its fur, do not feel helpless. Do not think you are empty-handed just because you haven't made a trip to the supply store. Look at what you have right now. You have your own 2 hands. You have a cup of warm water, and you have that one single drop of soap sitting on the ledge of your sink. I invite you to step out of the cycle of buying and rushing, and step into the quiet rhythm of the old way. Sit down in the evening light. Take the time to look at your animal, to work slow, and to tend to the nest around her with a thorough broom and a hot wash. It is a simple thing, a humble thing, but it is a piece of real self-reliance you can master in an hour. It costs you nothing but your patience. It keeps a heavy chemical out of your home, and it brings a suffering creature back to peace by the strength of your own care. The people who built the homesteads and worked the land generations ago knew that a household is kept whole by these small daily acts of mind.